The avoidance heart breaks quietly when you stop explaining yourself. Have you ever noticed that the moment you stop chasing someone's understanding is the moment they finally realize they've lost you? We always think heartbreak is loud, crying, begging, dramatic text messages. But sometimes the deepest heartbreak happens in silence. It happens when the person who always tried to explain, to fix, to prove their worth, finally just stops. You see, when you love someone who keeps you at arm's length, someone avoidant, you become fluent in over-explaining. You explain why you reacted the way you did. You explain your needs, your intentions, your love. You try to make them feel safe enough to meet you halfway. But eventually, something shifts. You get tired of auditioning for basic understanding. You realize that your peace is louder than your explanations. And when you stop explaining, that's when the avoidant heart quietly cracks. Because for the first time, your silence says something they can't ignore. I'm no longer waiting for you to understand me. I understand myself now. That's the moment they feel the loss. Not because you yelled, but because you finally withdrew the energy that kept them safe from their own emptiness. They don't lose your words. They lose your warmth. And trust me, that silence, it echoes. We often think that explaining ourselves is the key to connection. We tell ourselves, if they could just understand where I'm coming from, they'd see my heart. So we start clarifying, softening, over-communicating, hoping our words will bridge the emotional gap. But what we don't realize is that when we keep explaining ourselves to someone who avoids intimacy, we're not having a conversation anymore. We're doing emotional labor they were never willing to do. When you love someone who struggles to face closeness, you naturally step in to fill the silence. They leave, you start anticipating their reactions, cushioning your truths, and giving context for feelings that should simply be respected. You start making their comfort your responsibility. Every time they withdraw, you explain. Every time they misinterpret, you explain again. It becomes a loop. You explain to be understood, but the more you explain, the more you teach them that understanding you is your job, not theirs. The truth is, over-explaining isn't communication. It's caretaking. It's a quiet way of managing someone's emotional distance. It says, I'll make this safe for you, even if it costs me my peace. You think you're solving a problem, but you're actually maintaining the imbalance. You're carrying both sides of the connection, your needs and their fears. That's not love. It's overfunctioning. People who fear closeness often hide behind confusion. They say things like, I just don't get why you're upset, or you're too emotional. It keeps them in control because the moment you start explaining, they don't have to confront their own avoidance. They can sit back and let you do the emotional heavy lifting. And when you finally stop explaining, they call you distant. They'll say you've changed. But what's really changed is that you've stopped doing their part of the work. Over-explanation is often rooted in fear. The fear of being misunderstood, of being seen as too much, of being abandoned. You start believing that if you can just say it better, they'll finally stay. But love isn't a debate you can win with better words. True connection doesn't require constant defense. It requires mutual effort. When someone truly wants to understand you, they ask questions, they lean in, they meet you halfway. When they don't, no amount of explaining will ever make them ready. Every sentence you speak trying to justify your heart is a small betrayal of your own worth, because your feelings don't need translation to be valid. You don't have to be a perfect communicator to deserve compassion. When you realize this, you start to see the quiet exhaustion that comes from constantly managing someone else's discomfort. You start to notice how drained you feel after every talk that goes nowhere. You start to see that the peace you crave won't come from explaining yourself more clearly. It will come from finally stopping. Stopping isn't giving up. It's acknowledging that understanding shouldn't have to be wrestled out of someone. It should be offered freely, the way you've been offering your heart all along. People who avoid intimacy often believe that space equals safety. They convince themselves that the less they need, the less they can be hurt. They build a quiet distance around their emotions, a kind of invisible wall that feels protective, but actually keeps them disconnected. To an avoidant person, closeness feels like danger and vulnerability feels like exposure. They're not trying to hurt anyone. They're trying to survive. But what they don't realize is that the same space they use to protect their heart also starves it. Avoidance often grew up in environments where emotional needs weren't met or were even punished. They learned early that depending on others leads to disappointment, so they became self-sufficient, proud of how little they needed. They equate independence with strength and vulnerability with weakness when someone tries to love them deeply. It threatens the fragile balance they've created. Their instinct is to pull away, not because they don't care, but because closeness activates a fear they can't quite name. They start to feel suffocated, misunderstood, or pressured, even when the other person is simply trying to connect. The tragedy is that their version of safety keeps them lonely. The very thing they do to protect themselves ends up being the reason they can't experience real love. Space gives them control, but it also creates isolation. And the more distance they build, the harder it becomes for anyone to reach them. The avoidance partner, meanwhile, often interprets that space as rejection and tries to close the gap by over-explaining, over-giving, or proving their loyalty. This only reinforces the avoidance belief that closeness is overwhelming, and so the cycle continues. One person chasing, the other retreating, both silently exhausted. What's important to understand is that space isn't always the problem. It's the intention behind it. Healthy space allows two people to breathe, to stay grounded in themselves while connected to each other. Avoidance space, however, is built on fear. It's not a pause. It's a withdrawal. It's not rest. It's escape. It's the kind of distance that says, if I keep you far enough away, you can't disappoint me. But connection requires risk. You can't build love and stay completely safe at the same time. True safety doesn't come from controlling distance. It comes from emotional honesty. It's not about how far you stand from someone. It's about how authentic you can be when you stand close, when both people can express their needs without fear of judgment. That's when security forms. The avoidant heart has to learn that safety isn't in the walls. It's in the willingness to let them fall, even just a little. It's a painful truth that many avoidant people only realize what they've lost after the silence comes. When the one who always tried to reach them finally stops explaining, the quiet feels different. The space that once felt safe starts to feel empty. That's when they begin to understand that the connection they feared was the very thing that could have healed them. Silence can feel like the scariest thing in the world when you've spent so much time explaining yourself to someone who never really heard you. You're used to defending your feelings, clarifying your intentions, and filling every gap in the conversation with words that try to fix what's broken. So when you finally stop explaining, the silence feels heavy at first, almost unnatural. But what you don't realize right away is that silence can be a boundary, not a punishment. It's the moment you stop negotiating your worth and start protecting your peace. People often mistake silence for coldness, but silence born from self-respect is not cruel. It's clear. It says, I no longer need to convince you of who I am. There's a calm power in stepping back and allowing your actions, your absence, and your stillness to speak for you. For someone who's used to overgiving, silence becomes an act of emotional rebellion. It's choosing not to participate in conversations that drain you, not to chase validation that never arrives, and not to explain feelings that were dismissed the first time you shared them. When you stop explaining, you're no longer performing for connection. You're no longer trying to control how someone perceives you. Instead, you're trusting that your truth can stand without constant justification. Silence becomes your line in the sand, the point where you decide that your energy is too valuable to spend on convincing someone to care. It's not about shutting them out. It's about letting yourself in. It's choosing you. The avoidant person often doesn't recognize this shift right away. They might see your silence as distance or emotional withdrawal. But what's really happening is balance. For so long, the dynamic has been one-sided. You doing the explaining, them doing the avoiding. When you stop explaining, you stop feeding that imbalance. You stop giving them the comfort of your constant reassurance, and that absence of energy, that quiet space, forces them to face the emotional gap they've created. Silence, in this sense, is truth made visible. It shows what words can't, who is willing to meet you in understanding and who was only ever comfortable when you did the work for them. It exposes what was real and what was dependent on your effort. It's not passive aggression, it's self-protection. You're not withholding communication to punish them. You're simply no longer offering it as a gift to someone who can't receive it. At some point, you realize that peace doesn't always look like resolution. Sometimes it looks like letting the noise die down, walking away without closure, and trusting that the quiet will bring you back to yourself. That's what silence really is, a boundary disguised as stillness. It's the space where you stop chasing explanations and start listening to what your own heart has been trying to say all along. That you don't have to speak to be understood, especially by someone who was never really listening in the first place. When you stop over-functioning in a relationship, the shift is quiet but powerful. For so long, you've been the emotional engine that keeps everything running, the one who reaches out first, smooths things over, explains, reassures, and fills in every silence with effort. You tell yourself you're just being understanding, but deep down you know you're compensating for what the other person isn't giving. You've been holding both ends of the rope, mistaking tension for connection. And when you finally let go, that's when the avoidant starts to feel the weight of what you carried. Avoidant people often take emotional effort for granted, not because they're cruel, but because they've grown used to love being given freely while they stay guarded. They learn to expect understanding without ever offering it back. Your consistency becomes their comfort zone. They may not meet you in vulnerability, but they rely on your stability. They know that no matter how far they pull away, you'll find a way to close the gap. So when you stop, even quietly, the balance shifts in a way they can't ignore. The silence becomes louder than any confrontation could ever be. Your withdrawal exposes how dependent they were on your emotional labor. They thought they were the independent one, the strong one, the one who needed space. But what they really depended on was your willingness to keep trying. They leaned on the fact that you'd always explain, always reach out, always make sense of the confusion between you. When that stops, they're left to face the emptiness they've been avoiding, the space they created but never thought they'd have to sit in alone. It's a strange kind of reckoning for them. They start to realize that your effort was never guaranteed. They begin to see that connection doesn't sustain itself. It's built, maintained, and nurtured. The texts that used to come no matter how distant they were don't arrive. The warmth that softened their edges goes missing. The conversations that once made them feel understood now feel like echoes. And in that quiet, they're forced to acknowledge that love doesn't just exist, it's carried. And for a long time, you were the one carrying it. For you, the withdrawal isn't about punishment. It's about alignment. It's about deciding that your energy deserves reciprocity. You're not trying to teach them a lesson. You're reclaiming your balance. You've realized that being the one who always fixes things doesn't make you strong. It makes you exhausted. You see that love should be mutual effort, not one person constantly proving their worth while the other hides behind detachment. The moment you stop over-functioning, you invite reality into the relationship. You allow the truth to reveal itself. Will they step forward now that you've stopped carrying it all, or will they let the connection fade? Either way, you find peace in knowing that your worth no longer depends on how much you can hold together. The avoidance dependence on your effort becomes visible only when your silence removes it. Healing begins when you stop needing to be understood by the person who never tried to understand you. For so long, you've been translating your emotions into words that might finally make sense to them, hoping that if you just explain your heart the right way, they'll finally see you clearly. But healing isn't found in that moment of recognition. It's found in the release, the quiet acceptance that some people will never understand you the way you hoped, and that this doesn't make your feelings any less valid. Healing means letting silence speak for you. There's something profound about no longer chasing comprehension. When you stop, you take back the power you gave away in your search for validation. You start to see that understanding isn't always the same as love, and that the absence of understanding doesn't mean you're unlovable. You begin to build a new relationship with yourself, one that isn't dependent on whether someone else gets it. Your energy, once scattered across explanations and apologies, starts to return home. You feel the stillness where anxiety used to live. You feel peace where confusion once roamed. Letting silence speak doesn't mean closing your heart. It means trusting that your truth doesn't need defending. Silence becomes a language of self-worth. It says, I know what I feel, and that's enough. It's not cold or detached. It's grounded. It's choosing stillness over chaos, calm over convincing. You stop being the narrator of your pain and become the guardian of your peace. And when that happens, you notice how much energy you once spent trying to be heard by someone who had no intention of listening. The beauty of healing in silence is that it creates space for clarity. When you're no longer entangled in proving your point, You can finally hear your own voice again. You start to notice patterns that once kept you stuck. The ways you tried to earn love by over-explaining, the moments you mistook their indifference for mystery, the times you silenced your own needs to make them comfortable, and slowly you start to rewrite your story, not around what they failed to see, but around what you've finally chosen to honor within yourself. Silence is powerful because it holds truth without the noise. It doesn't demand an audience. It doesn't beg for understanding. It simply is. It's a declaration that your healing doesn't depend on someone else's awakening. You can forgive without reuniting, let go without closure, and move on without being understood. The avoidant may one day realize what they lost, but by then, your silence will have already told the story. You'll have found peace not in their understanding, but in your own acceptance. That's the real transformation. When you stop fighting to be seen and start living as if you already are. Healing isn't loud. It's the quiet confidence that your heart no longer needs an audience to be at peace. When you've spent so much of your life trying to be understood, silence can feel like loss. But what if it's not? What if silence is the first sound of self-respect? When you stop explaining, stop convincing, stop chasing someone who keeps their distance, you begin to hear yourself again. You start to realize that love was never supposed to feel like proving your worth. It was meant to feel like peace. The avoidance heart breaks quietly, not in the chaos of confrontation, but in the calm of your absence. They don't lose you when you argue. They lose you when you finally stop trying to be understood. And that's when your healing begins. You've spent so long trying to speak their language that you forgot the sound of your own voice. Now in this silence, you find it again, steady, whole, and unapologetic. This isn't about revenge or winning. It's about returning home to yourself. It's about knowing that your worth doesn't depend on how much someone else understands you. It depends on how deeply you understand yourself. So let the silence speak. Let it carry the message that words never could. That you are done over-explaining, done performing, done waiting for permission to be enough. Healing doesn't always look like being heard. It often looks like walking away quietly, carrying your peace like a sacred thing, and trusting that the right people won't need you to translate your heart. And if you've ever felt unseen, unheard, or misunderstood, know this: your silence doesn't mean defeat. It means you finally chose peace over proving. You finally chose you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for letting these words sit with you. And if something in them echoes within you, take it as a reminder that you are not too much and you were never asking for too little. Take care of your heart, protect your peace, and remember, sometimes the most powerful goodbye is the one spoken in silence.